Hi, this is Nate Schulte here, and I'm here with another episode of Discovering Battles with Nate. I know it's been a while, but I've been very busy in the past couple of months since I did my last broadcast of this stuff. Today's battle would be about the Battle of Fort Wagner, which took place on Morristown Island in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina on July 18th, 1863. Now, the men who were in charge of this were, one was Robert Gould Shaw, who was in charge of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, and there was also General George Strong. That was for the Union. There was also another man who we'll talk about in a little bit. He was Colonel Putnam, but I'll tell his full name in a little bit. What happened was the 54th Massachusetts Regiment was under the command of Robert Shaw, and this was one of the most famous battles for African Americans in the Civil War. They had about 600 to 650 men, and they were one of the first African American regiments in the Civil War to fight. So the Union had about 5,000 men for this battle, while the Confederate at Fort Wagner had 1,300 men. And they had the 51st and the 31st North Carolina regiments, and they had many artillery units in a makeshift fort called Fort Wagner, which was mostly mud slopes, and there was also a moat around it too. Now, for a moat, the disadvantages if you're the attacking force is that there's mud at the bottom of the moat, which you might get your feet stuck in, and if you're struggling to get out of there and you're being fired upon, you're almost a sitting duck. And you could also trip in there, and if there's rocks at the bottom, you hit your head and you could be knocked out and drown, and that's not good. But the moat was to kind of protect the fort, so that way, in case opposing forces did try to attack. But we'll get into that tactic in a little bit. The thing is that Colonel Shaw's men marched all night pretty much in heavy rain. They were exhausted, they were hungry, and they didn't have time to eat. Now, when your men are exhausted like that, or you make them march that long, they're pretty much, chances are they're not going to do their very best. But the African Americans were determined to prove that they were worthy of being troops in the American Army. And on a personal note, Robert Shaw was actually an abolitionist, and he believed that African Americans deserved the same rights as white people did, if I may use that phrase. Anyways, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment also had very limited experience. They only just fought a few campaigns or just a few rallies or raids, and that was it. There was no big battle, but this was going to be the ultimate test. The commander for the fort was Brigadier General William B. Teleferro. Before I go on, so Teleferro, like I said, had 1,300 men under his command. Now, what the strategy was that the 54th Massachusetts was going to go in there and attack Fort Wagner, and if they failed, then there were two other regiments that would charge afterwards. Well, the plan worked for the most part, because at twilight, Robert Shaw and his men charged over about a half a mile of sandbar, of the sand. Now, for this, and it's open area, and we all saw what happens when you charge over open field, especially a long distance, like what happened at Pickett's charge over at Gettysburg. They were pretty much subjected to fire. However, what was different about Fort Wagner was that the Confederates, they waited, but they had artillery units on other islands nearby. And when the 54th Massachusetts got to about 200 feet away from the fort, the Confederates started opening fire on the cannon, or opening with their muskets, and also from other islands, which I did not put into this model, but that's neither here or there. But that only inspired them to want to try and charge faster and faster and faster, because if you're under fire like that, you want to get to your objective as soon as possible, because if you delay, the longer you delay while walking across open field, the chances of you losing more of your soldiers. But then by the time they got to 660 feet away, men began to retreat. And then that pretty much was it for that. But then there was a second charge which took place at night that evening. Anyways, and as I was saying, but by the time they managed to charge, some of them managed to get to the top of the fort, and Shaw actually managed to get that far, but he was hit by that. And what happened, he was trying to rally his troops and everything. It's like, look how far I got, man. Come on, let's go. Let's show them what we're made of. But that was practically suicide, because cannons started firing upon the men there and muskets. They fired so rapidly that, and so accurately, that so many men were pretty much being almost wiped out all over the place. Even men in the rear, because they were confused, they ended up accidentally shooting men in the moat area here, and also some of their friends that were actually trying to get to the parapet. Right. Okay. But when that happened, General George Strong ordered his men to charge for the rest of the brigade, but it also failed. But Colonel Haldimand S. Putman and his regiments charged and shot. They ended up accidentally shooting soldiers in the confusion too. So pretty much it was a massacre. So many men were killed at this battle, there were very few survivors. Something to point out, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment took about 40% casualties in this. But altogether, the casualties for the Federals was 1,515 men, and the Confederates lost 174 men. Somebody I'd like to actually talk about here who was at this battle was a 23-year-old sergeant by the name of William Carney. Now, Carney was in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, and what happened was when a flag bearer got hit, he grabbed the flag. He tried to rally troops to, charge forward here, but when the order was given, he managed to bring it back to the rear here, and he was wounded almost all over. He was wounded in the leg, the arm, the chest, and the head. He eventually ended up becoming one of 23 African Americans to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for this. As for my analysis for this battle here, it was a massacre, but what could have been done differently is like what happened at Milton's Bend and Shiloh. The Union forces could have had some gunboats, trying to fire upon the fort here. And with doing that, they would be able to, turn their cannons, towards, if there was a ship there. And then while the ships, Union Navy ships, and the fort were fighting with the cannons, hopefully that would give them the 54th Massachusetts and other regiments to actually go charge across. And also they could have had some artillery units, fire upon the fort too on the land. The Union could have had some artillery regiments to actually fire upon. But it was so strong. By the end of the battle, practically all those men were killed, and most of the men, including Robert Shaw, he was buried with his men in a trench. My sources for this battle are Fort Wagner at battlefields.org, and then we have Coastal War here by Peter M. Shelton. And then we have the Day by Day, the Civil War Day by Philip Catcher. Civil War series, Black Soldiers by Joseph Galathar. Then we have the Civil War, an illustrated history, which was written by Jeffrey C. Ward, Rick Burns, and Ken Burns. By Catherine Reef, we have Civil War Soldiers. And then I have the Atlas of the Civil War by Neil Kagan and Stephen G. Hyslop. Thank you very much for watching my video, and I hope this was very informative. And don't forget to click like and subscribe. And thank you again for those of you who are loyal subscribers. My thanks to you all. I will be doing some more battles as time goes by. Have a nice day.